I never imagined I'd be the villain in someone else's fairy tale, especially not in a wedding story. But here I am, 36, typing this on a Wednesday night with my tea going cold, trying to make sense of a situation that started as a small favor and somehow turned me into the obstacle to my sister-in-law's happily ever after. For context, I'm a civil engineer, the kind who actually enjoys drainage maps and the sound of old pipes being replaced. Glamorous, I know. 10 years ago, when I was 26, I bought a creaky, narrow brick townhouse on a sloping street because everyone else walked in, smelled the damp plaster, and ran. I stayed. I renovated every inch over years of Saturdays, reinforced the joists, added skylights, so I turned the small backyard into a pocket garden with string lights and lemon balm that insists on taking over everything. It's not a mansion. It's a labor of love with a stubborn streak, like me. I'm married to a high school literature teacher who can quote Baldwin and Neruda from memory and still forgets where he left the keys. He's 37, kind, and conflict avoidant in that charming but inconvenient way. His family, my family by marriage, own a small upholstery shop across town. They're proud people, practical in public, sentimental in private. And then there's his younger sister, Isla, 28, heart-forward and heat-seeking, a person who lives at volume 11. She has 7 different Pinterest boards titled My Aesthetic and uses the word vibe the way surgeons use scalpel. She changes paths every season. Last spring was pottery, then came herbalism, then a drift into wedding content creation. And somewhere in there, she got engaged to a man named Callum, who shoots landscape photography on medium format film and pronounces quarry in a way that makes everyone stop and listen. He's from abroad, Scotland. And he's thoughtful in emails and quiet in person, and seemingly smitten with Isla. They've been together, 7 months total? I don't say that to judge, love is fast sometimes, but it matters here. The ask came on a breezy evening at my dining table, where the wood still bears the faint ring of an old water stain. I never sand it out because it reminds me that mistakes happened and nobody died. Isla arrived with a folder, a tape measure, and a hopefulness that felt like a bright light you can't stare into for long. She wanted, she said, a garden ceremony under the ivy wall, string quartet nestled by the rosemary, vows timed with the golden hour pooling through my skylights, then dinner inside at the long table with candles in different heights and mismatched antique plates for the story. Her voice softened as she said it. She wanted a wedding at my house. I blinked. Not because it's such an outrageous idea. People borrow spaces. But because she hopped right from I have a dream to we've made a mood board and then began marking measurements on painter's tape along my floorboards like she was laying claim. I asked practical questions. How many guests? What's the plan for the kitchen? Where will the vendors stage? How do we protect the floors? What about permits for amplified music? She had answers and non-answers. Around 65 guests, she said, plus maybe 10 more if a few cousins flew in. Caterer, probably, a friend. Music, acoustic, which I know can still rattle glass. As she spoke, she moved through the rooms, narrating her vision to the air, and I followed, half charmed, half calculating risk like I would on a site visit for a tricky build. I want to be honest, part of me warmed at the thought. I've hosted small dinners with twinkle lights and grilled peaches and an old portable speaker we named Agnes. The idea that my place could hold something sacred, 2 people promising to try for a lifetime, it pulled at me. And Isla's smile when she imagines beauty is its own type of persuasion. But there was also a hitch in my chest that had nothing to do with logistics and everything to do with how Isla sometimes treats reality like an improv prompt. She once borrowed my linen napkins for a photo shoot and returned only 3 of 8 because they wandered. She has arraigned apologies that sound like compliments to herself. Still, family is family, and I thought maybe this is a moment to weave ourselves closer instead of tugging apart. I said I'd consider it if we made a real plan. I drew up a checklist the way I do for clients. Guest cap, insurance rider, cleaning crew, day of coordinator, refundable deposit for damage, caterer with proof of licensing, music cutoff at a reasonable hour, rental restrooms, because 65 guests in my 2 bathrooms is a math problem I don't want to solve at midnight, a vendor route that doesn't tear up the garden, and a photo policy that preserves my neighbor's privacy. I wasn't trying to be the fun police. I was trying to be an adult. Isla nodded vigorously to everything in theory. Then in the group chat labeled Wedding Brain Trust, she wrote, "OMG, you're amazing. This is so official. I love it," followed by a string of sparkle emojis. On paper, we moved forward. I requested a small deposit, mainly as a symbolic anchor, so we all treated the house like a venue and not a prop. I set it at an amount that wouldn't hurt them, low triple digits, because I didn't want to profit. I wanted boundaries. Isla said she'd circle back on the deposit and the insurance rider once the content calendar is final, which wasn't an answer, but I let it ride for exactly 1 week. The next time we spoke, she brought a different kind of request. She wanted to use the house the whole week before for staging. Her idea was that her bridesmaids would crash in the guest room, the groomsmen would rotate through barber shots in my upstairs bathroom with the good light and the clawfoot tub, and her hair person needed a corner by the back door for extensions. Also, because her fiancé's family would be arriving from overseas, could my husband and I stay elsewhere from Thursday to Sunday so the house could breathe the story without random energy in the background? I felt my heart scratch against my ribs. Stay elsewhere, as in vacate my own home for 4 days for the vibes. I asked her, calmly I think, what she proposed we do with, say, our lives, our work, our dog, our things, our mail. She said she imagined we'd love a mini staycation, and she had even picked a boutique hotel that photographs beautifully and offered to tag us in the stories. That was the first time the word content felt like an intruder at my table. I told her we wouldn't be leaving our home, but we could carve out ready rooms for vendors, and, if she wanted, the guest room could be used on the day of, provided someone responsible oversaw it and the deposit and insurance were in place. She tried a different tack. "It will be so weird for Callum's family if you're there. We told them this house is, like, the family home. You know, vintage, handed down." The way she said "we told them" made the room tilt. I asked, "What exactly did you tell them?" She flinched, glanced at her phone, and then said lightly, "Just that it's our family's place in the city, which is sort of true because you're family." I felt heat climb my neck. My husband, ever the diplomat, put a hand on my elbow and said, "Isla, you can't tell people this house is yours. It's not." She shrugged. "I didn't say it was mine, I said it was ours. And it will look bad if new people think my brother and his wife are crashing during the wedding." That's when she dropped the bomb softly, like a person setting down a teacup. Also, about the guest list, we're keeping it very curated. No offense, but we didn't include you two for the day of, just so the aesthetic stays consistent. I laughed because sometimes laughter happens where tears can't. "We are not invited to a wedding happening in our house?" I asked. She blinked, surprised I'd said it out loud. "You'll totally be tagged, though," she offered, as if that were a plus. She added something about how I dominate conversations when I get going about building codes and equity and infrastructure, which is true, I care. And she wanted the focus to be on romance, not regulations. She suggested we pop by during cleanup if we wanted to say hi to extended family after the photographers left. I stared at the lemon balm in the garden and thought about how fast it spreads if you don't cut it back. I should have ended it then. I should have stood up and said the simplest sentence. No. Instead, I went quiet the way women go quiet when we are assessing whether our anger is reasonable enough to release. I told her we would revisit everything once the deposit and insurance certificate hit my inbox. She said, of course, kissed my cheek, filmed a 5-second clip of the ivy with a song that made the leaves sound like a heartbeat, and left in a little tornado of perfume and chalk dust from her tape measure. When the door closed, I could breathe again. My husband leaned on the doorframe and said, softly, "We might be at the edge of something here." I nodded. I could feel the edge under my toes. A day later, instead of the insurance rider, I received a spreadsheet of shot lists and a politely condescending text that said, "To keep the mood seamless, let's have you two do a low-key exit Wednesday night, and we'll DM you when it's time to come back. We even planned a cute basket for your hotel." The subtext wasn't even sub. It was just text. Get out. Be invisible. Be grateful. That was when my yes turned into a maybe, and the maybe started hardening into a no. 2 mornings later, I woke up to the sound of hammering outside my window. Not metaphorical hammering, but real, nails on wood hammering. When I pulled the curtain aside, I saw 2 men in neon vests measuring my back deck. A van sat idling in the driveway with Eternal Moments Wedding Co. stenciled on the side. My stomach dropped. I went downstairs, still in my robe, coffee forgotten, and stepped outside. One of the men smiled politely and said, "We're here for the venue layout, ma'am. The bride gave us the access code." The bride. Isla. I didn't even remember giving her the access code, which meant she had either remembered the old one or copied the key. My hands trembled as I called her. She answered on speaker, laughter in the background. "Oh, they arrived early? Great. I was worried they'd be late. Don't worry, I told them to be respectful of your plants." I didn't shout. I wish I had. Instead, I said something like, "You're not supposed to have anyone here without me present." She giggled. "Oh, come on, it's just a walkthrough. You'll love how it's shaping up. The arch will go right by your lemon tree, and poetic, right?" Poetic was not the word I would have chosen. Intrusive, maybe. Violating, definitely. When my husband came downstairs and saw the scene, his face tightened in a way I rarely see. He asked me quietly, "Do you want me to handle it?" And I did. I always do. But I shook my head. This was my boundary to hold. I went outside again and told the workers to stop. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to sound calm, "but this event is not confirmed. You'll need to speak to Isla directly." They looked uncomfortable, professionals caught in family politics, and began packing up. Isla texted me 5 minutes later. "You embarrassed me. They think I'm unorganized now." I took a long breath and replied simply, "You crossed a line. There won't be a wedding here unless we finalize the agreement. Respect my home." She didn't reply that day, but her silence wasn't peace. It was preparation. That night, my mother-in-law called. Her voice carried that soft tremor she uses when she's about to ask for something she already knows is wrong. "Honey, could you please be patient with Isla? She's under so much pressure. You know how creative people are." Creative. That word again, stretched like a blanket to cover bad behavior. I told her, as gently as I could, that this wasn't about creativity. It was about respect. She sighed and said something that made my skin crawl. "You have such a beautiful home. It would be selfish not to share it for one special day." Selfish. I bit my tongue because I could feel anger rising, slow and steady. I said goodnight and hung up before I said something I couldn't unsay. 2 days later, an invitation arrived by courier. Thick white envelope, gold lettering, and wax seal. My husband opened it with a small smile. "Maybe she's making peace," he said. But inside, the names read, "Isla and Callum invite you to join them in spirit on their wedding day at the family estate." In spirit. At the family estate. My house. It was official now. She had built her lie into the stationery. That evening, I sat on the back steps, the smell of rosemary thick in the air, and thought about all the small yeses I had given women like her throughout my life. Yes, I can stay late. Yes, I'll cover your shift. Yes, take my idea and present it as your own. It's fine. Yes, you can borrow that dress. Yes, I'll smile while you tell people it's yours. Every yes was a brick in the wall that boxed me in. Maybe this was the moment I finally said no, loud enough to echo. I told my husband I was changing the locks the next morning. He hesitated but didn't argue. "You're right," he said. "It's gone too far." The locksmith came at sunrise. By noon, new keys clicked cleanly in every door. I texted Isla afterward, "Please do not bring vendors to my property again. The house will not be available for your event. Find another venue." Her reply came fast. "You're destroying everything. Do you want me to look like a liar in front of his family?" I stared at the screen before typing, "You did that yourself." That night, my husband's phone buzzed nonstop. His parents, his aunts, even a cousin I hadn't met, all pleading, negotiating, guilt-tripping. The message was the same. Don't humiliate Isla. But none of them had to wake up to strangers hammering stakes into their backyard. None of them had to erase themselves from their own home so someone else's fantasy could breathe. The next morning, Isla showed up in person. She didn't knock. She marched straight into the living room, trailing perfume and fury. "You can't do this to me," she said, voice trembling, eyes wide and wet, but not from sadness, from outrage. "Do you realize how stupid I'll look if I have to tell everyone it's off?" I told her calmly that she should have thought about that before lying. Then she said something that, in hindsight, sealed her fate. "I can fix this if you just stay out of sight. I'll tell everyone you're traveling for work. Please, it's just a few hours." That's when I laughed, not cruelly. Just the kind of laugh that slips out when you've crossed the border between disbelief and freedom. "No, Isla, you're not having your wedding here. Not now, not ever." She stared at me like I had slapped her. "You're ruining my life," she whispered. Maybe I was, but only because she had built that life on a lie that lived inside my walls. When she left, I locked the door behind her, turned off my phone, and sat on the couch in silence. I could feel the stillness of the house, the same house I had rebuilt with my own hands. For the first time in weeks, it felt like it belonged to me again. Later that night, my husband received one final call from his mother. "Do you know what this means for her reputation?" He said quietly, "Maybe it's time she builds one based on truth." Then he hung up. The following day, the wedding planner called to confirm the cancellation. I told him politely that there had been a misunderstanding. The property was never a venue, merely someone's home. He thanked me for clarifying and sounded like he'd already guessed as much. As I write this now, I still don't know what will happen between Isla and her fiancé. But I know one thing for sure. I'm done apologizing for protecting my peace. Sometimes no is the most generous word you can give. What would you have done in my place? Would you have let the wedding happen or stood your ground like I did? Let me know your opinion in the comments below. The morning after I sent the final message to Isla, my phone was a battlefield. Missed calls, half-written apologies from relatives who didn't know the full story, and one voice message from my father-in-law that began with, "You've broken your husband's sister's heart," and ended with, "We just don't understand why you couldn't be generous." Generous. The word stung, not because I disagreed with generosity, but because it was being used like a weapon. In their world, generosity meant compliance. It meant erasing yourself for the sake of someone else's image. That afternoon, while I was reviewing some site plans for a new municipal project, I heard the unmistakable sound of tires crunching on the gravel outside. I looked out the window and saw a sleek black car pulling into the driveway, Callum's car. My pulse quickened. He stepped out slowly, holding his phone like a shield. The man looked tired, older than the last time I'd seen him at a family dinner. "Hi," he said awkwardly. "Is Isla here?" I stepped outside, keeping the door halfway closed behind me. "No," I replied. "She's not." "Why?" He hesitated. "She's not answering her phone, and the wedding planner said the event was canceled. She told me you—" He stopped himself mid-sentence. "She told me you were jealous and didn't want her to be happy." I almost laughed at the absurdity. "Jealous? Of what?" I asked. He rubbed his temples. "I don't know. She said you tried to sabotage things because you didn't get along." That was the moment I decided that kindness, the kind I'd been raised to uphold even when people didn't deserve it, was no longer the right tool for this situation. I said, as gently as I could, "Callum, I think you deserve the truth." And so I told him. Not the dramatized version, not the convenient half-truth, the actual sequence of events. How Isla had asked to use the house, how I agreed under specific conditions, how she then lied to his family saying the home was hers, how she planned to uninvite us to a wedding inside my own walls. I watched the color drain from his face with every detail. When I finished, there was a long silence between us. Then he said quietly, "So this house isn't your husband's family home?" I shook my head. "No, it's mine. Bought it years before I even met your fiancé." He nodded slowly, processing. "And she told my parents she grew up here." "Then she lied," I said. He took a few steps back, leaning against his car. I could see it in his eyes, that moment when admiration for someone starts to crumble into disbelief. He looked at me and said, "Thank you for telling me. I wish she had." Then, after a pause, "I guess that explains why she panicked when I said I wanted to help pay for the venue." Before leaving, he asked for one small favor. "If she shows up here, please don't let her in. I need to sort things out before I see her again." I promised I wouldn't. He drove away, and I went back inside, feeling equal parts relieved and hollow. I had no desire to destroy anyone's relationship, but the truth doesn't wait for the right moment. It just arrives and demands to be seen. By evening, my phone was once again flooded, this time with messages from Isla herself, angry ones, the kind that jump between accusation and desperation. You didn't have to talk to him. Then, he's gone silent because of you. Then, I can't believe you're doing this to me. I didn't reply. There's nothing productive to say to someone who twists reality like ribbon. But I knew this wasn't the end, not with Isla. Sure enough, the next morning she showed up. No car this time. Just Isla, standing on my porch with her hair undone and mascara running, wearing a hoodie that looked borrowed. I opened the door a few inches and said her name, softly but firmly. "Please," she said, "I just need to talk." She started crying. Real tears this time, not the kind that shimmer for effect. "He left," she said. "He said he needs to think. His parents think I lied to them and they won't take my calls." She looked at me like I held the key to her undoing. "You ruined my wedding." I wanted to tell her that she had done that herself, that honesty could have saved her months ago, that maybe love built on deception was always going to fall apart. But I didn't say any of it. I just said, "Isla, you can't come here again. I wish you peace, but this isn't my burden anymore." She stepped back, eyes wide, as if I'd slammed the door in her soul. "You sound just like my mother," she spat, "always judging." Then she turned and walked down the path, shoulders shaking. After she left, I called my husband. He was quiet on the line for a long time before saying, "I think this is the end of whatever we thought family meant." And it was. Over the next few days, word spread through the family network. Everyone had an opinion. Some blamed me. Others privately admitted they'd seen this coming. My husband's aunt even texted me, "She needed to be humbled. Don't feel guilty." That message sat unread for hours before I replied with a simple thank you. The truth is, I did feel guilty. Not for ending the lie, but for how final it felt. I didn't enjoy any part of this. I didn't feel victorious. There's nothing satisfying about watching someone's fantasy collapse, even if it was built on your stolen foundation. Later that week, I received a knock on the door. When I opened it, there was an envelope. No note, just a wedding invitation torn neatly in half. I didn't need to read it to understand what it meant. Inside the house, everything was silent except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. I sat down and realized that, for the first time in weeks, there were no strangers measuring my garden, no family demanding explanations, no lies hovering in the air, just quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like healing. That night, I made a small toast with my husband on the back porch. "To truth," I said. He clinked his glass against mine and added, "and to locking the door." We both laughed, and it felt like reclaiming something that had been taken from us. But deep down, I knew Isla's story wasn't over. People like her don't fade quietly. They rewrite endings until they feel like heroes again. Would you have told the fiancé the truth if you were in my shoes? Or would you have stayed silent and let things play out? Tell me your honest thoughts in the comments below. It's strange how silence can be both peaceful and terrifying. For 2 days after Isla's visit, there was nothing. No texts, no calls, no new drama. My husband and I dared to believe it might finally be over. We cleaned the house, watered the plants, made dinner without tension, thick in the air. For a moment, life slipped back into its normal rhythm. But peace never lasts long when it depends on someone else's denial. On the third morning, my neighbor Clara, the one who always knows everything before the mailman does, showed up at my door, coffee mug in hand and eyes wide. "You should check social media," she said. "I think your sister-in-law is talking about you." I opened my laptop, half dreading what I'd find, and there it was, a long, tearful post on Isla's account, captioned with, "How betrayal feels when it comes from family." The video showed snippets of her walking through a garden that looked suspiciously like mine, intercut with her crying in what must have been her bedroom. The caption claimed that I had kicked her out of her own home, stolen her dream wedding, and publicly humiliated her fiancé's family. She never mentioned my name directly, but the clues were all there. Comments poured in, full of sympathy and outrage. People called her brave, heartbroken, the victim of toxic relatives. My stomach turned. The post had over 10,000 views in an hour. At first, I thought of ignoring it, staying above the chaos, letting time dissolve the noise. But then I remembered how easily one lie can metastasize if left unchecked. So I took screenshots of everything and sent them to my husband. His reply came back immediately. "Let's not engage online. We'll handle this offline." I wanted to believe him. But that evening, I got an email from my employer's HR department. Someone had sent them a message claiming that I harassed and evicted a family member for profit. The sender used an anonymous address, but the tone was unmistakable. It was Isla's writing, full of dramatic phrasing and misused punctuation. My HR manager assured me that the company didn't take anonymous tips seriously, but the humiliation of it stung. It wasn't just family gossip anymore. She was trying to poison my reputation professionally. That night, I cried. Really cried. Not from anger this time, but from exhaustion. My husband held me and said, "I'm so sorry, I should have stepped in sooner." But I knew this wasn't his to fix. This was mine. The next morning, I called my lawyer, an old friend from university, and asked what could be done. He told me calmly, "Start with documentation. You've got screenshots, messages, timestamps. That's good. Don't respond publicly. Keep records." He also reminded me of something I had almost forgotten. Truth always sounds quieter than lies at first. Let time do the heavy lifting. Meanwhile, Isla's world was starting to fracture. According to a mutual cousin, Callum had officially canceled the wedding. He'd gone back to Scotland, taking his family with him. The post about betrayal remained online, but the comments started shifting tone as people noticed inconsistencies in her story. Someone asked, "If it was your house, why did your sister-in-law have the legal right to cancel the event?" Another wrote, "Sounds like miscommunication, not betrayal." And then, one brave user simply said, "Maybe tell the full story before playing victim." The tide was turning. But Isla didn't retreat. Instead, she doubled down. She posted another video, this time claiming that I had locked her out of her memories and destroyed her future. It would have been almost poetic if it weren't so manipulative. My husband wanted to call her directly, but I stopped him. "Let her burn through the attention," I said. "It's all she has left." Days passed, and the buzz began to fade. The internet moved on, as it always does. But family? Family doesn't scroll past. My in-laws showed up one afternoon unannounced. My father-in-law's face was red, my mother-in-law's eyes swollen from crying. They asked to come in. Against my better judgment, I let them. We sat in the living room, the air so thick with unspoken words, it was almost hard to breathe. My father-in-law started first. "She's saying you ruined her life." I looked him straight in the eye. "She ruined her own life when she lied." He exhaled sharply, rubbing his hands together. "You could have handled it differently. You didn't have to tell Callum the truth." "She made my home part of her deception," I replied. "What would you have done?" My mother-in-law whispered. "We just wanted her to have one happy day." I felt something snap inside me. "At whose expense?" I asked quietly. "Mine? My husband's? The truth's?" No one spoke for a long time. Then, surprisingly, my husband entered the room from the hallway. He'd been listening. "You both need to understand," he said to his parents, "that Isla's happiness has never required honesty from her. And that's the problem." My father-in-law's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. My mother-in-law just wept quietly, saying over and over, "This family is breaking." I didn't tell her that it had already broken years ago. It just took a wedding to reveal the cracks. When they left, my husband and I sat together in silence again. This time, it wasn't the suffocating kind. It was heavy, but clean. The kind that follows a storm when the air smells like rain and relief. Later that week, a letter arrived in the mail, forwarded through a relative. It was from Callum. Handwritten, neat, deliberate. "I wanted to thank you for your honesty," it read. "It hurt, but it saved me from a much bigger hurt later. I'm sorry you became collateral in someone else's lie. I hope your home is filled with peace again." I read it twice before setting it on the mantel. It felt like closure. That evening, I stood in the garden where the ceremony was supposed to take place. The string lights hung unused, swaying gently in the wind. I thought about all the laughter and music that might have filled this space, and how instead it became the setting for truth. Raw, uncomfortable, necessary truth. Sometimes, protecting your peace means breaking someone else's illusion, and maybe that's okay. If you were me, would you have confronted Isla online or kept silent like I did? Tell me what you would have done in the comments. I'm curious how others see this kind of betrayal. A week passed before I realized the noise had finally stopped. No more calls, no more messages, no new posts. The digital storm had exhausted itself, leaving behind the eerie quiet that follows chaos. I remember waking up one morning, stepping into the kitchen and hearing only the hum of the refrigerator and the faint rustle of leaves outside. For the first time in months, my home didn't feel like a battleground. It felt like what it was always meant to be, a refuge. I spent that morning cleaning, not the kind of frantic cleaning that comes from anxiety, but the slow, meditative kind. I dusted the bookshelves, watered the lemon balm, and opened every window to let in the sunlight. As the fresh air rolled in, it felt like the house itself was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. Every trace of that wedding that never was had disappeared. The measuring tape, the rented table, the flower samples. It was just me, my husband, and our space again. He came into the kitchen while I was making coffee and said softly, "You know, I think she's gone for good this time." I looked up from the counter. Gone as in moved on, or gone as in plotting from the shadows? He smiled faintly. Let's call it temporary exile. That made me laugh, the first genuine laugh I'd had in weeks. But even in that moment of calm, a strange sadness lingered. I didn't miss Isla's chaos, but I mourned the family we'd lost in the process. My husband had stopped answering his parents' calls completely. They'd chosen silence, maybe out of shame, maybe out of loyalty to their daughter. Either way, it left a hollow space where family dinners and inside jokes used to be. I thought about calling them just to check in, to say something neutral. But every time I imagined the conversation, I heard the same accusation. You could have handled it differently. Maybe they were right. Maybe I could have been softer, more diplomatic. But I also knew that no amount of diplomacy could have saved a situation built on deceit. Later that afternoon, I found myself sitting in the garden again, in the very spot where Isla had wanted to exchange her vows. The ivy had grown thicker since then, climbing higher up the wall, resilient and wild. I thought about how symbolic it was. Life continuing regardless of our messes, truth rooting itself deeper, even when we try to prune it away. I closed my eyes and let my mind replay everything. The first time she asked to use the house, the lies, the confrontation, the heartbreak that followed. But as I watched it unfold in my mind, something shifted. I no longer saw myself as the villain in her fairy tale. I saw a woman who simply refused to be erased from her own story. That realization hit harder than I expected. For so long, I'd equated being good with being agreeable. But goodness isn't always quiet. Sometimes it's firm. Sometimes it stands its ground even when everyone calls it selfish. That night, my husband suggested we take a short trip, somewhere quiet, somewhere with no phone reception. We could use a reset, he said. We booked a cabin by the coast, small and unassuming, just a few hours away. When we arrived, the air smelled like pine and salt. We walked on the beach, collected shells, watched the sunset in silence. No drama, no lies, just stillness. It was there, standing by the water, that I finally let the anger go. Not because Isla deserved forgiveness, maybe she didn't, but because I deserved peace. Holding on to resentment felt like carrying a stone in my chest, and for the first time, I wanted to feel light again. When we got back home, I found a small package waiting on the porch. Inside was a folded letter and a small photo. Isla and Callum at what looked like a coffee shop. The note read, "I'm sorry, I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I'm trying to start over. Thank you for being honest when I couldn't be. Maybe one day I'll learn to tell the truth before it's too late." There was no return address, just her handwriting, shaky but familiar. I stood there for a long time, the photo in one hand, the letter in the other. Part of me wanted to throw it away. Another part wanted to hold onto it as proof that maybe, just maybe, something good could still grow from all this wreckage. In the end, I slipped the letter into a drawer. Not to dwell on it, but to remember that closure sometimes comes quietly, not in grand apologies, but in the simple act of acknowledgement. It's been 3 months now. The house is calm, the garden thriving, and the family drama mostly reduced to whispers in the distance. My husband and I have learned something crucial about boundaries, that they're not walls meant to shut people out, but fences that protect the garden of your peace. Every now and then, I'll walk through the backyard at dusk and imagine the string lights Isla had planned, the laughter that never came. But instead of bitterness, I feel gratitude. Because if her chaos hadn't forced me to draw the line, I might never have learned how to defend the quiet I worked so hard to build. If anyone reading this is standing on the edge of a similar situation, where someone you love asks for more than you can give, please remember this. Saying no doesn't make you cruel. It makes you honest. And sometimes, honesty is the only gift that can save everyone, even if they don't see it that way at first. So that's my story. A wedding that never happened, a lie that unraveled, and a woman who finally learned to stop apologizing for protecting her own peace. Now it's your turn. Tell me what you think. Was I too harsh, or did I do the right thing? Would you have handled it differently? I'd really love to hear your opinion in the comments below.